Thank you. I'm Ray Knapp, and I'm happy and actually very proud to be presenting this panel, which is not really a panel, it's a roundtable. I'm not sure how round it is, but it's dialogic in nature in a way that I find really appealing and as an interesting format change from what's been a very interesting format for the conference yesterday and today. The topic is, how do you hear Parkinson's? Understanding chronic illness experience through sonic and musical metaphor. This will start as a kind of dialogic presentation by Ross Brillhart and Daniel B. Reed, followed directly by a response from DEBORAH Wong. So I just want to say a couple of things and then we'll jump right into it. We have heard much yesterday and today about some of the dangers of metaphor, and it's important to be reminded, as we will be in this session, that they are also powerful enablers and key elements of communication, without forgetting the ways that metaphor tends, especially when unacknowledged, to reinforce problematic, often unspoken notions of normal, pure, natural, and mainstream at the expense of marginalized conditions in peoples. So with that kind of complicated give and take, let's just go to it. So I turn it over to Ross and Daniel.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. And we're really excited. Yesterday was really fascinating, and thank the organizers and everyone else who's involved in putting together this very interesting symposium. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Miyamake, Lenape, Bodwadwamik, and Sawana people on whose ancestral homelands Indiana University Bloomington is built. I'll go ahead and share my screen now and we'll get started. Okay. How do we hear chronic illness? What work can sonic and musical metaphors do to aid our understanding of human experience of disease? Based on an emergent dialogic ethnography undertaken by Ross Brillhart, an ethnomusicologist specializing in music and health, and myself, an ethnomusicologist with Parkinson's disease, this brief presentation explores these questions. We will argue that employing Ross's theoretical frames of health self and hearing Parkinson's in our dialogic ethnographic process has amplified my sensory embodied perspective on my progressive illness and made increasingly audible sonic and musical metaphors that structure and embody my understanding of that experience. Metaphors have emerged as central not only to my understanding and articulation of my changing experience of being in the world, but also to our conceptualization of our ethnographic process. By demonstrating the value of metaphor in making a health experience audible, this ethnography realizes ethnomusicology's potential to increase understanding across human difference.
The power and importance of these sonic metaphors have permeated the entirety of the project Daniel and I have thus embarked on. Many of these metaphors that we uncovered stemmed initially from our approach to health itself, built around metaphor that I had previously developed in a project with groups of sober and recovering concert goers in the jam band music scene that hold support group meetings at the concerts they attend. I came to define health in a new way based on a metaphor to the self in humanist and social theory. Based on that research and what is developed here with Daniel, I argue that health is best conceived as a synonym to, or conceptually the same as, the self. Ethnomusicologist Thomas Torino conceptualizes the self, quote, as comprising a body plus the total sense of habits specific to an individual that develop through the ongoing interchanges of the individual with her physical and social surroundings, end quote. Additionally, anthropologist Eduardo Kohn defines the self as, quote, the outcome of a process unique to life of maintaining and perpetuating an individual form, a form that, as it is iterated over the generations, grows to fit the world around it at the same time that it comes to exhibit a certain circular closure that allows it to maintain its self-same identity, which is forged with respect to that which it is not, end quote. Some of you may notice the theoretical underpinnings through the discourse of these two scholars, Bourdieuian practice theory and Peircean semiotics. I chose these purposefully because I believe these foci of maintenance and perpetuation are often the crux of our process as selves, and certainly most appropriate for my discussion of understanding health as self. Utilizing these concepts, I think about the health self as the perceived reality experienced, embodied, and performed by an individual as they relate to the constitutive elements that directly affect them, including personal and group interactions, ideals and culture, society, institutions, and natural environment, the past, and certainly the biological, psychological, and physiological present. Utilizing this metaphor as our theoretical foundation and understanding of health carries certain assumptions and guides our methodology in a few different ways. First, this concept of the health self aids in moving beyond a view of health as something that someone has and towards something closer to the complexity of many people's realities. Health, then, is not a possession. We don't have health, we are health. And while health becomes us and other conceptions of our health self tends to structure us, it is within the realm of the qualitative engagement with the health self that identifies those qualities that come to matter. Second, the health self concept is not solely musical or auditory and is thus non-disciplinary at the core, inviting other scholars outside of the health sciences and music, in this case, to engage in these conversations. Finally, for those like most of us who are engaging with music and sound, this construct compels people to move beyond assumptions of music as inherently healing or intrinsically a piece of healing processes. Just as music is not a universal language, it's also not inherently healing, but it is an integral way in which we can understand, perform, and embody ourselves. This concept informed this project from the start and led us on interesting paths away from more predictable lines of questioning and analysis regarding music and sound's role in therapeutic, medicinal, or healing interventions. Instead, we pushed forward with the belief that by examining sound and music in Daniel's life more broadly, we would come away with valuable insights that might otherwise be shrouded by assumptions.
How do you hear Parkinson's? Ross asked me. Having lived 14 years as a person with Parkinson's, I had used music and sound extensively in my treatment, but it had not occurred to me to root my ethnomusicological self in my own body, in my senses, and contemplate my embodied sonic experience of this chronic degenerative disease. Hearing Parkinson's not only has functioned as an analytical framing metaphor, it has also proven effective at eliciting metaphoric understandings. Hearing Parkinson's serves as a productive framing metaphor because it applies Ross Brillhart's health self concepts, expansion of the interrelationship between sound and music and health to encompass all sounds and music in my life, not just those sounds epistemologically or a priori understood as healthcare focused, but any that help illuminate my embodied experience of Parkinson's. The embodied sensorial understanding that has become audible in the work Ross and I have been doing together has emerged through an organic dialogical ethnographic process that we are echoing in our collaborative presentation today. Metaphorically, we conceive of our dialogical process as jamming. Based on our shared interests and vocabulary, we improvise, one of us offering a phrase that the other riffs on, breaking down conventional boundaries of the researcher and researched, the subject and the object, ethnographic data and analysis, and for that matter, teacher and student. Before we can jam for you and with you, we must establish the key. And so we are jamming today in the key of Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological disorder that damages dopamine production in the brain, resulting in motor symptoms such as tremor, stiffness, difficulty with walking, balance, coordination, and speech, and non-motor symptoms, which include apathy, depression, and cognitive impairment, among many others. With that brief clinical biomedical description of biomedical description of Parkinson's disease describes what is happening to me, it fails to evoke how it feels to live life in the key of Parkinson's. Understanding how Parkinson's feels is much better accomplished through metaphor. Neurologist Oliver Sacks, employed musical and sonic metaphors beautifully to better understand Parkinson's. What Sachs calls normal, but I might label non-Parkinson's movement, he describes as having a naturalness and a fluency, a kinetic melody, or a smooth, graceful flow. Sachs writes, when we walk, our steps emerge in a rhythmical stream. By contrast, a Parkinson's walk manifests as a kinetic stutter. That's what it feels like. I find value in these musical metaphors not just because they are imaginative. Rather, as Ross put it to me one day, what we have found valuable is, quote, what these metaphors are pointing towards, which is this profound experiential narrative of my musicality in terms of my experience with Parkinson's, end quote. And or, I wondered, do metaphors help construct a narrative of Parkinson's in terms of my musicality? With this question in mind, we invite you into our dialogic ethnographic process where metaphors began to emerge. Following is a very brief excerpt of our first Zoom session in September 2021. I was trying to help Ross understand how Parkinson's symptoms, which can vary erratically day to day and even hour to hour, feel when I'm at my worst.
I've become very mindful. I have to, because I can really quickly go to frustration.
Yeah.
Because there's this sort of, I find myself making reference to Oliver Sacks. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. There's the flow, like a melodic flow. If you just think about, I'm gonna walk down the street, and you just do it, That's a very different experience than I'm gonna walk down the street. Let's see. First, I have to push myself out of this chair. I can't get up, All right, I'll get up. Oh, yeah, I did it. Okay, now I'm standing up. Woo! Oh, I lost my balance.
Yeah.
What was I doing? Oh, yeah, I was gonna walk down the street. Okay, where's my shoe? Okay, there it is. Reach and grab the shoe. Okay. You see what I mean? It's like you were playing Shostakovich before, and now you're going twinkle, little star. The music of your experience, your flow, your rhythm, it's kind of broken down into constituent parts, and it's like you're dealing with scales again instead of. I learned those scales, and now I can just improvise. Yeah.
Right.
While our focus today is experience of disease, sonic metaphors also aid the understanding of treatment. In 2014, I had surgery to implant a deep brain stimulator, or DBS. Neurosurgeon Michael Okun explains that a DBS emits white noise into the Parkinson's affected area of the brain to, quote, change the songs those brain cells sing, end quote, thus alleviating symptoms. Conceptually, hearing Parkinson's thus unites an ostensible binary of two very different analytical frames of reference, sound in treatment and sound as experience. Metaphors silence the either or and make audible the both and.
Through metaphor, experience, and understanding, riffs and narratives on Parkinson's and musicality meld into one, representative of the health self. They provide the overture for our thematic moves through sound and Daniel's being in the world. As we navigated our emerging project, I took note early on that Daniel's responses regarding his musical practices often related back to not just Parkinson's disease, but to therapeutic maintenance. We worked together through some of these therapeutic notions and tied them together with work he's done in the past. And albeit important, I felt this line of inquiry to be well worn, that jam was familiar. There's often a danger in studying health where researchers get so caught up in disease, the hospital, or the ritual that they forget to consider the whole person. All elements that make up personhood inform one's health. They make up the health self. And with that, I offered a new riff or motif to jam on. Like Daniel's DBS, I reintroduced sound into the conversation. A question and stilted conversation on listening proved fruitless for the most part. Listening as an action perhaps is a little too agentive or intentional. However, when I asked Daniel if he hears Parkinson's in anything, and if so, how, we struck a chord, as the thisness of sound became the thatness of his health self.
So how do I hear Parkinson's? I hear Parkinson's in the songs my brain cells sing and in the white noise that changes their conversations. In the sweep step, sweep step, sweep step of my feet walking, left foot dragging across my hardwood floors. In the asymmetrical meter click, 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 click of my walking sticks on asphalt as I walk down my street toward the woods. In the silent voices of my online students' words written in discussion responses to my interactive recorded lectures. In the beep beep of my remote deep brain stimulator controller. In the Motown playlist that helped me make it through an early brain MRI. In the rhythmic pace of the clicks of my computer keyboard. In the increasing buzzes and accidental deadening of strings on the fretboards of my basses and guitars. In Cat Stevens' Moonshadow. And if I ever lose my hands, oh, I won't have to work no more. And if I ever lose my legs, oh, I won't have to walk no more. And if I ever lose my mouth, oh, I won't have to talk.
Borrowing from Sternfeld, one way to conceptualize our sonic metaphor of hearing Parkinson's is as a Parkinson's acoustemology, the combination of acoustic and epistemology, or a sonic way of knowing and being in the world. Many of the above examples communicate an acoustemology of Daniel's interaction and understanding of the world he inhabits, the way he understands Parkinson's through sound and sound in the key of Parkinson's. However, the sonic experience and knowing is equally explanatory when turned inwards towards the body, and particularly the voice, a sort of acoustantology, or the combination of acoustic and ontology. The voice and the emplacement of Parkinson's in the body in tandem with our metaphorical improvisation points towards not just the ways in which Daniel understands the world through sound, but also the ways in which he exists in sound.
How else do I hear Parkinson's? I'll read from my field notes. I told Ross about my encounter with Zachary, which is a pseudonym, at the farmer's market. Zachary, a musician probably 10 years older than I am, was diagnosed with Parkinson's some years after I was, but he has declined precipitously. He moved through the market using a walker, and though I tried with all my might to understand him, I could only make out an occasional word. Until his partner walked up, I was unable to communicate with him at all. Zachary could not make himself known using his voice and language. Paradoxically, however, Zachary's voicelessness did communicate one thing to me profoundly. In the whispery, unintelligible sounds of Zachary's voice, I heard Parkinson's. I hear Parkinson's in the sound of my own weakening voice, in my lack of enunciation and poor articulation and hurried speech, which I have to really focus on to do a presentation like this. In the increasing utterances of what from people around me. In people's silent movements, stepping or leaning toward me when they can't understand me, their embodied response to my voice. Again, I turn to my field notes. Today, Ross and I were talking about the voice as embodied sense of self, not just in an expressive sense, but almost more ontologically or existentially. I altered Descartes' I think, therefore I am, to I sing, therefore I am. Playing instruments is an embodied experience, but there is nothing to compare with singing. The instrument is literally within your body and feels inherently part of the self. So my voice getting weaker, it feels personal in a visceral way. Like my voice embodies myself, my music, and my health all in one inextricably united being. As Catherine Meisel writes, losing a voice can be, in some ways, losing oneself, or at the very least, one's primary mode of enacting identity. I hear myself, my health self, in my voice. When I struggle to sing, I don't feel like myself. And yet Meisel, Nina Eidsheim, and other voice study scholars complicate the metaphorical relationship between voice and self. While Eidsheim observes that, quote, vocal fluency has served as the naturalized barometer for gauging rationality, intelligence, and ultimately humanness, end quote. She also points us toward Meryl Alper's argument that voice is an overused and imprecise metaphor, one that abstracts, obscures, and oversimplifies human experience of disability. Meisel, drawing on Bakhtin, Barthes, and others, argues that an individual's voice embodies not only the speaker, but also the listener and the intersubjective life experience of communication with others that informs an individual voice. As I hear it, Meisel's multivocality also recognizes that an individual has multiple voices, just as a self consists of multiple dynamic and situational identities. In other words, the voice is inherently plural and relational, connecting selves and others in embodied sound and being. Because my voice is inherently social, listening to my voice's sounding in the world renders more audible something about my experience as a person with Parkinson's. Ross has observed that as my disease has progressed, my musicking, from teaching to performing, has become increasingly a solo endeavor, cut off from others as I increasingly teach online and make music alone at home. Hearing Parkinson's in my voice makes audible the idea that voice is inherently relational, connecting self and other in embodied sound and being. Conceptually, hearing Parkinson's helps me understand why it is that when I'm not engaging my voice socially in community, my health self is impoverished, partial, less whole. Ross's health self model, with its hearing Parkinson's line of inquiry, has helped me better understand myself and my experience of Parkinson's. My hunch is that we're beginning to show that Ross's health self has legs, that it has potential applicability to ethnographic studies of other health conditions, and perhaps even topics outside the sphere of health. This project has also reminded me why I love metaphor, and its ability to show the thisness of that, to establish relational meanings that lead to deeper understandings.
Utilizing metaphor and sound as communicative devices aids in moving beyond the singular or symbolic. Accessed via the lines of inquiry briefly illustrated throughout this presentation, through sensorial and embodied reflection, these symbolic equations can guide others' thisness of experience through the thatness of Daniel's sounding in the world. The key, I would argue, to producing productive phenomenological and humanist research. By identifying the sign equations that are embodied by and personally representative of experience from a person with Parkinson's, rather than those utilized to structure general understanding of chronic illness or disability, we think these lines of inquiry can help to achieve a broader goal in ethnomusicology of increasing understanding across cultural differences. And of equal importance, we hope to inform other realms of research and practice that could also lead to modifications and new directions in treatment protocols in medicine, wherein the health self is considered rather than the medicalized self. We see this as key to the work of our project. And thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Deborah, are you ready?
I am. Hey, Daniel.
Hi, Deborah.
Hey, Ross.
Morning.
Good morning. You know, in listening to you present, I was just like, I kind of blew it. I should have written this with you. I mean, you've set up this whole, amazing, thinking, writing, talking, knowing together model. And, I went off all by myself and wrote my response. What was I thinking, Nonetheless, this is what I have. I heard, I wrote this as if it were addressed to other people, right? Which I'm now realizing was like, really not what I wanted, but that's what I have. So I'll say to everyone in the room, I heard a longer and earlier version of this presentation 6 months ago at Indiana University, which is Ross and Daniel's home institution, where they presented together in a symposium, a really wonderful symposium called Musical Bodies. And I was moved and I was fascinated by their presentation for several reasons. Before the symposium, I didn't know Ross at all, and I only knew Daniel from afar, though I'd been aware of his, really excellent scholarship for years. And in a way, I got to know both of them as scholars and as scholars living with and alongside Parkinson's, at the same time through their presentation. I'd like to offer some thoughts on what we just heard. First, I'd like to reflect a little bit on, sonic metaphor in the health self. And then I'd like to turn to the metaphor of witnessing. I'll start with the place of sonic metaphor in the health self. And as Daniel put it, quote, hearing Parkinson's not only has functioned as an analytical framing metaphor, it also has proven effective at eliciting metaphoric understandings, close quote. Together, Ross and Daniel deployed a set of ethnomusicological methods, both ethnographic and sound-based, to consider how Daniel hears his own changing body, from the dragging foot to his shifting voice, from his deep brain stimulator to his intensified reliance on music to understand his relationship to Parkinson's. And together they suggest that all this is part of Daniel's Parkinson's acoustomology, in which sound and the self are co-constitutive, and this ecology of place, time, and presence. After all, we all know that acoustomology is the place where sound, environment, and epistemology converge. I think it's important to remind ourselves that Sternfeld's generative concept of acoustomology emerged at a very specific critical juncture, more than 40 years ago. And it then outlived that moment in really interesting ways. The idea has continued to gather theoretical momentum over time. The idea was central to Sound and Sentiment from its very first edition in 1980, in the very late years of structuralism. And that was part of this heady period in the 1970s and the 1980s, when metaphor and cultural coherence were being explored in many different disciplines. And I realized, a few days ago that Sound and Sentiment, Judith Becker's work on Javanese gamelan, and Lakoff and Johnson's Metaphors We Live By, they were all published within months of each other, so there was this moment of sort of critical convergence, you could say. And so acoustomology, Feld's acoustomology, and an attendant focus on metaphor arose out of late structuralism and the humanities, certainly, and was then unusually, I think, sustained and carried forward, past that moment, past that time, into the theoretical turn towards cultural studies and post-structuralism, et cetera. I think it's fairly unusual for a theoretical paradigm to outlive its originating moment, but Feld's acoustomology certainly has. And Ross's construct of a health self shaped by an acoustomology of the medicalized body is thus an indication of how a powerful theoretical configuration has continued to stretch, change, and gather momentum over time. My final point is probably the only one that matters. This is really happening to Daniel. Arguably, for any of us who are not Daniel and who do not live with Parkinson's, metaphor is perhaps the nearest we might come to understanding what Daniel knows so intimately. But Daniel makes it clear that he experiences his own progressive disease in several different ways, and one of those ways is through metaphor. That is, he learns about his own condition through metaphor. And yesterday, Nate Mitchell reminded us in the chat that Lakoff and Johnson argued that in some cases, there is no thing without a metaphor. So would Daniel know his own changing voice without metaphor? Would he understand the messages of his deep brain stimulator without metaphor? It's impossible to know, of course, but it certainly seems as if metaphor is essential to Daniel's ability to hear and thus know his own changing condition. It would be glibly insensitive to observe that, all humans change all the time, that change is all we know, but Daniel's foreknowledge is in another key, in another register. Yesterday, Ellen Waterman reflected on her efforts to learn from others how to listen with the whole body. That was a great presentation. She called it a bodily listening in place. And she admitted to how she has to continually correct her own quote unquote ableist bias. And again, that's exactly what Daniel is living. His points of reference keep moving, his landmarks multiply, his need to adjust and adapt is constant, his abilities shift and shift again. Experience is central to Daniel's and Ross's work together. I think it matters quite a lot that Daniel is reflecting on his own condition and that Ross stands alongside him. Ross witnesses Daniel's Parkinson's from very nearby. And I'm thinking that Iris Blake's exploration just now of sympathetic resonance and dissonance is surely useful here. And Daniel draws in close to each change as it comes to him, using his skills as a musician and as an ethnomusicologist to try to make sense of it. And of course, a critical mass of scholars have made their own health self the focus of research. I'm thinking of Paul Stoller, I'm thinking of Sarah Lochman-Jane and others. And in some ways, Daniel's work with Ross bears a family resemblance to theirs. But how does Daniel's and Ross's work shift ethnomusicological assumptions around sonic wellness and ability? Now, how does their overlapping dialogic shared journey clear a new space? The two of them, they can't and don't have the same knowledge, of course, but the way they use ethnography to lean into one another is tremendously valuable, I think. They look together at the space between, experience in place and the experience of walking alongside it. One thing that seems different to me about Daniel's and Ross's work together is how they not only bear witness to Daniel's transformations, but they offer the gift of their shared journey to us. They invite us to see how a whole bunch of things, research, mentoring, collegiality, friendship, compassion, care, and support can be interconstitutive. They allow us to see an ethics of care between two men. And this public enactment of experience and shared journey really goes a long way towards collapsing subject-object relations, and it nudges us towards a consideration of generosity and responsibility. I'm saying that if we choose only to try to engage with Daniel's journey as an exercise in, critical thought, we miss one of the most important modalities of what it means to listen and to bear witness. To bear witness means committing to the act of seeing and hearing something. And as Diana Taylor famously writes, the role of the witness is to serve as a responsible ethical participant rather than a spectator to crisis. The witness can too easily become a mere spectator to history, life, crisis, change. So to bear witness means carrying some of the burden. To bear witness means accepting the responsibility to pass on the insight, to be part of the act of transfer. And then you might ask, to transfer what? From whom to whom? And metaphor might or might not help with that. So I thank Daniel and Ross for the gift of your work together, to all of us, for your gift to me, for allowing me to watch your work stretch and unfold over the last 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah, thank all of you. And please, I guess we're going to get the four of us in a group. So we move to the more interactive part of this session. And I want to start with the same admonition, but also invitation. We strive to promote an open, honest, and mutually supported exchange between all symposium participants. We ask that all approach one another in the shared conversation with kindness, curiosity, and respect for the different positions we are all bringing to the table, as well as the accommodations we are implementing to ensure everyone is able to participate. I just wanted to start with an observation that this means a lot to me to be part of this session, even as a moderator, but actually as host, I think. Partly because I have been trying and struggling somewhat to develop a course on musical performance and disability. And this way of getting past the idea of normal and to something that is more personalized that you've modeled here has been really wonderful. And I still have to think about how, but I know it will become central to the way I approach my topic. So thank you for that very practical and timely intervention in my own career. We'd like to open this to questions. I can see the chat. I can also see you if you raise your hand and want to speak directly. Yeah. It's not a question, but I'll read out Griff Rolfson's witness versus spectator is a wonderful way to put it. Thanks all. Much shorter than what I said, but I think similar. Well, I think to continue the dialogue component, it might be fitting to ask Daniel and Ross if they want to respond to the respondent in any way.
I really like the bringing into the conversation the bearing witness of Diana Taylor. I think that's a very powerful way of understanding what I see this really extraordinary student and friend and colleague and collaborator Ross doing. It's his skill at listening and at asking the right question and the depth of his empathy has been why this has worked so well. I mean, he's got great theoretical ideas as well, but it's really a deeper level, the core of his humanity, and the way he interacts with me that helps me understand this experience that I'm having more deeply. So I like that way of thinking about bearing witness. Thank you for that. And the ethics of care model as well, which I think works very well. Yeah.
I think we're all learning about that right now over the last 2 years. But I should say, I didn't say this, but I'll say it now. I'm really appreciative of the ways that it's been super important for medical ethnomusicology to emerge as an area, but you took your whole project out of that box. You made it, you made it clear that this is about so much more than that. And it suggests that, that you put all of these questions right back at the heart of the humanities. And I really, appreciate that. That's my cat.
And I appreciate you appreciating that. I've been part of medical ethnomusicology, part of that conversation for as long as I've been coming up in ethnomusicology, and they are so important and continue to do such important things, but putting that medical box around their inquiry kind of misses out on some of this more humanist focused stuff. And yeah, I agree with Daniel 100% that this observation of the witness in this case is, I think that's going to prove really fruitful for me to sit down and kind of think about a little more. I mean, it's interesting. I don't want to be gushy, but thank you, Daniel, for being gushy towards me. But I feel like I've been taught a lot about ethnography, and some of the most important stuff that I've been taught about it, learning from Daniel and others there at IU, is ethnography as radical empathy rather than some way to understand music through participation, even though that's also what it can be. So I think as I'm moving through these projects, that's always my first, especially when it comes to health, that's always my first goal, is just to start as radically as possible and empathically as possible with getting to know somebody.
So we have a question now from Charles Epley. Daniel, I wonder if you could speak to your relationship to disability community and identity. I feel connection between your talk, Michael's yesterday, and then Jonathan Stern's new book on impairment plus phenomenology. In other words, the experience of navigating and evolving one's relationship to disability, impairment, community, and identity.
Right. Thank you for the question, Charles. Certainly, yes, I resonated with those with Michael's talk yesterday as well, and reference to Jonathan Stern's work was one of the things that got left on the editing room floor, paring this down to 20 minutes. Yeah, so and as well, the as Ross has observed, increasingly my musicking, broadly construed, is sort of focused around the idea of Parkinson's. So I have been engaged with the Parkinson's World Congress, and they used a song of mine to open their ceremonies in Kyoto, Japan, a couple of years ago. And now they've asked me to be on the committee adjudicating the song competition and the production of music for the upcoming conference in Barcelona. I've done a lot of benefits for Michael J. Fox Foundation. Increasingly, I write songs about the experience of Parkinson's. That's been an important part of my experience. So I engage in multiple communities, but increasingly they are communities through which I engage this aspect of my overall human experience. So it's become, it's important to remember that I am not Parkinson's. I am more than Parkinson's, and so that's something that you will often hear from medical practitioners, which is wise advice. But at the same time, I'm certainly involved in communities that are identified in that sense through sound and music.
Yeah. Many notes of gratitude in the chat.
The one thing, I mean, if another thing appears in the chat, let's go with that. But one of the things that I'm, just really, I didn't go into, I took it out, I wrote it, I took it out, was sort of thinking about the ways in which, your work together is so much sort of pushing against, any kind of unitary, sense of self, unitary approach to self, unitary concept, liberal humanist concept of self. I think, Ross, you said you took a lot of that out of this presentation, that it's, part of something that you write about elsewhere at a longer version of this. Is it something you want to, just tell us a little bit about now? Or perhaps I misunderstood. But I'm pretty sure you did.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually did say that in the first presentation you saw us give, for sure, which is definitely cut out of this one. It's something that I can touch on, but given my brain is moving at 50% capacity right now, so there's only so much I can get into with the cross-cultural understandings of selfhood and agency in the world. But yes, there is some of that I've had to cut out for this presentation, and just for the legibility of understanding this concept in these really short spaces and with this particular project. But there is a lot that I've written elsewhere, particularly for my dissertation, which is focused. I think I put a sentence in this presentation that's focusing on these groups of sober and recovering concert goers, wherein the health self is prominent to this work. It's where this theory comes from, but the self is certainly more than singular, and can cross in between different people, is in that sharing of self and non-singular self can be compromised, shared, understood through sound, through shared narratives, through the embodied musicking and healthing, if you will. I didn't write that, but if you will, of these people at their meetings, at these concerts, and people recovering in the same spaces, and sharing the places or their bodies in the process.
I think that's
Yeah.
actually, relevant to a question that's come up, or at least underscoring a point by Ben Given. Daniel Reed makes a crucial point about not being Parkinson's. Having studied music by disabled people for several decades, I'm very aware that some people don't want to be defined by their disability and may even regard attention to it as intrusions, voyeurism, etc. I think that speaks also to the courage that's being acknowledged in another comment earlier that I didn't read out. And I think that courage is tied in with, if I do this, am I making this me? And I think that's really, really wonderful that you're able to do it and understand and let us understand that that's not all of yourself, even though it's the self that you're presenting here. So again, underscoring the thanks I think we all feel, and for the courage and for and the beauty that you presented to us today, and for Deborah's acknowledging so much of that for us. So I think we will, at this point, it's 10:45, move to getting ready for the next session. But thanks to all three of you, and especially to Ross and Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you all.